The barrel of the gun glinted in the pale light leaking through the farmhouse curtains, and I remember thinking how absurd it was that my own sister's hands could tremble and still hold something so deadly steady. My name is Claire Morrison, and at 34 I'd survived every kind of cruelty except this. Vanessa's voice was a low hiss, the kind that snakes use before they strike. "Sign the papers, Claire," she said. "Right now, or this ends badly." The papers lay flat on the oak table between us, the ink still wet from the printer. I could smell the metallic tang of the gun oil mixed with the sour scent of whiskey from the bottle she'd cracked open an hour ago. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my face stayed calm. Behind her, the rain battered against the window panes like fists demanding to be let in. Vanessa's finger tightened on the trigger just slightly enough to make the world narrow into a tunnel of breath and heartbeat. My mother Margaret stood frozen by the doorway, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone white. "Please, Vanessa," she whispered, her voice cracking, but she didn't move forward. She never did. My father's old chair creaked in the corner where he used to sit barking orders that still echoed in my mind. Everything in that room was a ghost of control, from the photographs on the wall to the trembling reflection of Vanessa's rage in the mirror. "You always thought you were better than me," she spat. "Dad always said you'd ruin this family, and he was right. Now sign the damn papers." I let her words hang there. Every syllable was a rope she was tightening around herself. I stared at her, the woman who had once braided my hair, who had taught me how to lie to survive, and I smiled. Not a nervous smile, a calm, deliberate one. "You should look behind you," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked confused for half a second before landing on the corner cabinet where a faint red light blinked. Her hand jerked the gun, wavering. "What's that?" she snapped. "Proof," I said softly. The word seemed to slice the air open. For a moment, time stopped the rain outside my mother's shallow breathing, even the quiver of Vanessa's lip. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You wanted me to sign away Grandpa's land," I said, "but you just signed away your freedom." She blinked, the realization beginning to form, but it was too late. The camera blinked again, steady, unbothered, capturing everything. I kept my eyes locked on hers because fear was what she wanted, and fear was the one thing I'd never give her again. The room froze, the air thick with disbelief, and the only sound left was the click of the rain gutter dripping against the window frame. Vanessa's face twisted in confusion, her finger still trembling near the trigger. My mother let out a shaky breath, whispering, "Claire, please, don't make this worse." But the truth was, worse had been living in this family my whole life. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice echoing in the back of my mind, steady and low. "When they raise their voices, lower yours. That's how you win." I took a slow breath, keeping my eyes locked on my sister, the red light reflecting in her wide pupils. That's when it hit me. This moment wasn't sudden. It had been building for decades, one small cruelty at a time. Every insult disguised as advice, every slap of silence when I cried, every smirk when she saw me flinch. This gun was just the final punctuation mark to a lifetime of control. To understand how we got here, you have to know what it's like to grow up in a house where love was conditional and obedience was survival. Vanessa wasn't born cruel. She learned it just like I learned how to disappear to keep the peace. Our father Harold Morrison made sure of that. He believed fear was respect and pain was discipline. And our mother Margaret perfected the art of pretending everything was fine. I used to wonder if Vanessa ever felt sorry for me for the bruises I hid and the words I swallowed. But now, staring down the barrel of her gun, I realized she didn't. She'd only learned to pass the violence down like an heirloom. And that was the day I decided I would be the one to end it. The Morrison farmhouse looked peaceful from the outside, a white two-story house surrounded by 400 acres of rolling Vermont fields. To strangers, it was the kind of place you'd expect to smell of apple pie and old wood polish. But inside, it was a cage disguised as home. My earliest memories aren't of laughter or warmth, they're of footsteps, heavy ones. My father Harold Morrison had a way of walking that made the air fold in on itself. The floorboards creaked before he spoke, and that sound alone was enough to make me hold my breath. He was a man built on control, on volume, on fear. He believed respect wasn't earned, it was taken, and that a belt was as good a teacher as any sermon. My mother Margaret was his echo. She used to be soft. I remember her humming once quietly when she thought he couldn't hear, but over time she folded smaller until even her laughter came out rehearsed. "Keep your voice down, Claire," she'd whisper when Harold shouted, "Don't talk back." The message was clear. Silence was safety. Then there was Vanessa, 3 years older and already learning how to survive by becoming what he wanted. She mimicked his tone, his smirk, even the way he leaned back in his chair while judging everyone else. I used to envy her confidence until I realized it was fear in disguise. She got rewarded for it, of course, extra dessert, new clothes, his rare approval. I got chores and lectures about being too soft. At 12, I started counting how many times I heard the word disappointment. By 15, I stopped hoping for anything different. Grandpa George was the only one who saw through it. He was Harold's father, but they couldn't have been more opposite. Where Harold barked, George listened. Where Harold demanded, George taught. I'd sneak into the barn when Harold's temper got bad, and George would be there hands stained with oil fixing tractors and peace alike. He'd hand me a wrench, nodding toward the gears. "You see that, Claire? Everything works because each piece knows its purpose. But if one part tries to control the others, the whole thing breaks." He'd look me in the eye, his voice low but solid. "Don't let them break you." He was the first to tell me I was smart. He'd slip me $20 bills for school books and say, "Don't tell your father. Knowledge is the only inheritance they can't steal." I didn't understand it then, but those moments were lessons disguised as kindness. The day he died, something inside the house changed. The quiet became heavier, like even the walls knew the only good man had left. Harold didn't shed a tear at the funeral. Vanessa stood next to him, chin high, holding Mom's hand like she was rehearsing strength. But I saw her eyes calculating, scanning the crowd, already thinking about what Grandpa might have left behind. When the will was finally read years later, I wasn't expecting anything. I'd left for Boston by then, working as a junior attorney in a small firm building a life that didn't require walking on eggshells. But when the lawyer called my name and said, "To my granddaughter Claire, I leave the Morrison estate and all associated assets," the world tilted. Harold's jaw clenched so tight I heard his teeth grind. Vanessa laughed short and sharp like she thought it was a joke. Mom whispered, "There must be a mistake." But it wasn't. Grandpa had made it clear the land, the house, the savings, everything was mine. Because he trusted me. Because he believed in me. That moment rewrote the family order, and they never forgave me for it. From that day on, every phone call dripped with guilt and accusation. Vanessa would say, "You know Dad needs help. You could sell a portion of the land." Harold would growl, "You think you earned this?" And Mom would sigh, "Why are you tearing the family apart?" "Claire, I wasn't. I was just done letting them control me." Still, guilt is a hard thing to unlearn. For months, I avoided confrontation, sent small checks to help with repairs, and hoped it would calm them down. It didn't. The more I gave, the more they demanded. Until the day Vanessa said the words that still echo in my mind, "Family means loyalty, Claire. You wouldn't want to make enemies out of us." That was when I realized she wasn't my sister anymore. She was my father's mirror, and sooner or later mirrors always crack. 3 months before the night my sister pointed a gun at me, I found myself sitting in a dim, wood-paneled office in downtown Burlington. The smell of coffee and old leather mixed with the sound of rain on the window. The lawyer, Mr. Price, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Your grandfather's will is straightforward," he said. "He left the Morrison estate and its financial assets approximately $2.3 million to you, Miss Claire Morrison." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My hands froze in my lap, my breath catching. I glanced across the room. Vanessa's smile collapsed. Mom's eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. My father's fingers drummed against the armrest, his knuckles white, his face crimson. To her, Harold barked, "That's a mistake. George would never—" "It's not a mistake," Mr. Price interrupted, sliding the document across the table. "His signature's notarized. He was clear about his intentions. Vanessa let out a small, strangled laugh. "He must have been confused," she said. "He always said the land should stay in the family." "It is staying in the family," I said quietly. "I'm family." Harold slammed his palm against the table, the sound like a gunshot. "You ungrateful little parasite. You left this farm years ago. You don't deserve a cent." Mom flinched. "Harold," she whispered, "please." But he wasn't hearing anyone. His eyes bored into me red and raw. "You'll regret this," he growled. "Mark my words." I didn't say anything. There was nothing I could say that would make a man like him see reason. I simply folded the will and tucked it into my bag. I had no idea that moment would start a war. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and small poisonous gestures. Vanessa sent texts dripping with fake sweetness. "Let's talk about what's fair, Claire. We can work this out like sisters." Fair. That word had always meant something different to her. To Vanessa, fair meant her getting her way. To Harold, it meant obedience. To Mom, it meant silence. I stopped answering their calls. Then the vandalism began. First, a brick through my window with a note tied to it. "Family doesn't steal." Then tire tracks across my front lawn. Once, I came home to find the word traitor spray painted across my fence. I reported it, but without proof there wasn't much the police could do. I started waking up in the middle of the night, convinced someone was standing outside my house. Every shadow looked like revenge. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Pride, or maybe habit, kept me quiet. I thought if I ignored them long enough they'd get tired. But Harold Morrison didn't get tired, and Vanessa had always been his favorite student. The last call came on a Sunday afternoon. Vanessa's voice was soft, almost kind. "Dad's not doing well," she said. "Mom's worried sick. Can you come home for dinner? We can talk about the estate like adults." The words "come home" hit me harder than I expected. Against my better judgment, I said yes. Maybe I wanted to believe there was still some piece of family left to save. Maybe I was just tired of running from ghosts. I didn't know then that I was walking straight into a trap. That night, I sat in my car outside the farmhouse staring at the porch light flickering in the rain, and for the first time in years, I felt the old fear crawl back under my skin. I should have turned the engine back on, but instead, I opened the door and walked inside. The night of that dinner smelled like rain and cheap whiskey. The house looked the same as it had when I was a child. Same wallpaper, same faded curtains, same sense that something inside was slowly rotting. Vanessa greeted me at the door with a smile too bright to be real. "You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a warning. "Dad's resting. Mom's in the kitchen. Let's keep tonight civil, okay?" Civil. That word always sounded like a threat in this house. The table was already set, the food untouched, but arranged like a stage. Mom fussed over plates, her hands trembling. "It's good to see you, honey," she said, eyes darting between me and Vanessa. I nodded, forcing a small smile, but my stomach was tight. Harold sat at the head of the table, as he always had a half-empty bottle of bourbon beside his plate. His eyes followed me as I sat down. Dinner began in silence. The only sound was the clink of silverware and the rain pattering on the roof. Vanessa tried to fill the quiet with small talk about the farm, about the weather, about anything but the reason I was there. I answered in short, polite sentences, my tone as neutral as I could manage. Finally, Harold slammed his fork down, making the plates rattle. "Let's stop pretending," he said. "We all know why she's here." Vanessa gave a nervous laugh. "Dad." "No," he barked. "You think you can take what's mine? What I built." He leaned forward, his breath sour, his eyes bloodshot. "Your grandfather was senile when he signed that will. You tricked him." "That's not true," I said evenly. He sneered. "You always were a liar?" Mom reached for his arm. "Please, Harold, not tonight." But he shook her off his hand, brushing the bottle, sending drops of bourbon spilling onto the tablecloth. "You think you're better than us now? Just because you ran off and got some fancy job, you were nothing without this land." "I never wanted the land," I said quietly. "I wanted peace." Vanessa's voice came soft but sharp. "Then prove it. Sign it over to Dad, to us." The way she said us made my skin crawl. I looked at her. Really looked at her, my sister who once shared a bed with me during thunderstorms, who used to hold my hand when we were scared of our father's temper. Now her eyes glinted with that same cold hunger I'd seen in his. Family should share, Vanessa said, her tone syrupy. It's only fair. There was that word again. Fair. I placed my fork down slowly. Fair would have been letting me grow up without bruises. Her smile froze. Don't be dramatic! Harold roared with laughter, the sound cruel and loud. You always were a drama queen. Never could take a joke. Maybe you need a reminder of who's in charge. He pushed back from the table and stood towering over me. Dad, Vanessa warned, her eyes flicking toward me, but there was no concern, just calculation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You're going to fix this tonight. I stood my chair, scraping the floor. If you touch me again, I'll call the police. He smirked, leaning close enough that I could smell the bourbon on his breath. Police don't care about family business. That's when I realized they'd planned this. The dinner wasn't peace, it was pressure. Every look, every word, every plate of untouched food had been staged to corner me. Vanessa rose from her seat, calm, now voice sweet as poison. Let's not fight. Why don't we go to the study? I have something to show you. I hesitated, but she was already moving toward the hallway, heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome of manipulation. Mom followed, wringing her hands, whispering, "Please, just hear them out." As I stepped into the hallway, my heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I had seen this game before. The difference was this time I'd come prepared. In my bag, my phone was recording. In the corner of the study behind the stack of boxes I'd placed earlier that day, under the guise of old files, a tiny red light blinked. They thought they were setting a trap. They didn't realize they were already inside mine. The study smelled like dust and deception. The rain outside had thickened into a storm wind, rattling the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. Vanessa led the way, every step deliberate, her heels slicing through the silence. "Let's just talk," she said over her shoulder, her voice honey-sweet but sharp enough to cut glass. The moment I crossed the threshold, I saw at the table in the center of the room the neat stack of papers waiting like bait, a pen placed perfectly on top. My stomach dropped. Dad was already sitting in the corner chair, the bourbon bottle replaced with something worse. A handgun rested on the table beside him, black metal glinting under the single hanging light. He didn't look drunk anymore. He looked determined. "Sit down," he said, voice low, almost calm. I didn't move. My mother appeared behind me, eyes red and wet. "Please, Claire," she whispered. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her voice wasn't pleading for my safety. It was pleading for their comfort. I stepped closer to the table, my shoes creaking on the old floorboards. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. Vanessa picked up the top sheet and slid it toward me. "A simple quitclaim deed," she said, as if she were reading from a script. "Once you sign it, this whole thing can be over. You'll get a generous settlement and we'll all move on." I stared down at the papers. The words blurred, but the meaning was crystal clear. Signing meant giving up everything: Grandpa's land, the house, his legacy. It meant admitting they'd won. I looked up. "This is coercion," I said quietly. "You can't." Vanessa laughed high and sharp. "Coercion. Oh, please don't start talking like a lawyer. We're family. Family doesn't do this," I replied. Dad's chair scraped back. "Enough," he barked. He stood, grabbed the gun, and set it on the table between us. The sound of it hitting the wood was final. "You'll sign," he said, voice trembling with rage. "You'll do what's right for this family." The air in the room changed. My mother covered her mouth. Vanessa's smile widened, but her eyes were wild now, desperate. I sat slowly, hands flat on the table, palms open. "You're serious," I said softly. "You're actually doing this. Don't make it worse, Claire," Vanessa said. "Sign and we can all forget tonight ever happened." "You mean you can," I said. "I mean we can stop pretending," she hissed. "You don't belong here." "You never did. You were Grandpa's charity project, not his heir." The words hit hard, but they didn't break me. They never could again. I had spent too many nights believing their lies, drowning in their definitions of love. Not tonight, not anymore. I reached for the pen, turning it in my fingers. Dad's eyes flicked between the papers and my hand, waiting for surrender. I let the silence stretch until it hummed. Then slowly, I looked up and met Vanessa's eyes. "You've made one mistake," I said. "What's that?" she sneered. "You taught me how to play your game." Her face faltered confusion, replacing arrogance. "What?" Before she could finish, I tilted my head toward the far corner of the room. "Look over there." Dad frowned. "What the hell are you?" The red light blinked. Small, steady, undeniable. The camera sat half-hidden behind a vase on the shelf, the one I had placed there earlier that afternoon when I arrived under the excuse of dropping off paperwork. Vanessa's face drained of color. "What is that?" she shouted. I smiled faintly. "Insurance." Dad's voice thundered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I asked, sliding my phone from my pocket and turning the screen toward them. The live feed played in real time. Every word, every threat, every flicker of the gun was already saved in the cloud streaming straight to my attorney's office miles away. Vanessa lunged forward, her chair crashing against the wall. "Turn it off!" "It's too late," I said. "It's been recording for 20 minutes. Dad raised the gun, his hand trembling. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not of me, but of losing control. "You think this makes you smart?" he snarled. "You think you'll win?" My voice was calm, almost soft. "I don't need to win. I just need the truth." He stepped closer, pressing the barrel of the gun against my temple. My mother screamed. Vanessa stood frozen, mouth open, but silent. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my eyes didn't leave his. "Go ahead," I whispered. "Show them who you really are." His breath hitched. "You'll regret this," he growled. "I already do," I said. The thunder outside cracked like the sky itself was breaking open. The gun clicked the cold metal biting against my skin. Vanessa screamed, lunging for the weapon, and in that instant I saw everything, the chaos, the fear, the end of their illusion. The gun fired. The sound tore through the house like a scream that had been waiting years to escape. I fell backward, but there was no pain, no blood, just the ringing in my ears and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The bullet had buried itself into the wall behind me. I looked up, breath shallow, and saw my father staring at the gun in disbelief, his hands shaking. "Blanks," I said hoarsely. "Courtesy of someone who's always been one step ahead of you." His eyes widened, realizing the truth, just as flashing blue and red lights filled the windows. The storm had brought the police, and the past had finally caught up. The front door burst open before my father could move again. Rain and police lights flooded the room, the storm outside now roaring in chorus with the chaos inside. "Burlington PD!" A voice shouted. "Put the weapon down!" My father froze the gun, still trembling in his grip. For a moment, I thought he might turn it on himself, or worse, on me again. But then something broke in him. He dropped the weapon, his knees giving out as two officers surged forward. They forced him to the ground, the metallic click of handcuffs cutting through the room's heavy silence. Vanessa stumbled back. Her eyes, wild hands raised as if she could erase what had just happened. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like," she cried. One of the officers, soaked from the rain, looked around the room. "We'll see about that," he said, spotting the red light blinking from the corner shelf. He motioned toward another officer who retrieved the small camera with gloved hands. "Well, well," the cop muttered. "Looks like we've got your home movie right here." I sat there, still trembling, the smell of gunpowder burning my throat. My mother was in the corner, sobbing quietly into her hands. Vanessa's lipstick had smudged across her cheek, her confidence gone. "Is anyone injured?" an officer asked. I shook my head slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." The officer nearest me nodded, his tone softening. "We've got your statement, Ms. Morrison. The footage confirms everything. You did the right thing recording this." I let out a bitter laugh. "I've been recording them my whole life," I said, "just not with a camera." Vanessa spun toward me, her face streaked with tears. "You don't understand. He made me, Dad," he said. "Enough, Vanessa," I interrupted. "You chose this. Every time you looked away, every time you helped him hurt someone else, you made your choice." Her voice cracked desperate. "You think this makes you better than us?" No, I said quietly. It makes me free. Outside, the storm was breaking. Rain streaked down the windows, washing mud and dust off the glass. I watched as the officers led my father out. His hands bound his shoulders, sagging under the weight of his own rage. Vanessa tried to follow, but another officer held her back. "You're not going anywhere, ma'am," he said. "You're part of this investigation now." Her lips parted like she wanted to scream, but all that came out was a choked sob. Ryan appeared in the doorway. Then his clothes soaked his expression unreadable. He walked straight to me, crouched down, and whispered, "It's over. I sent the live feed to the district attorney's office. They saw everything I asked." He nodded. "Every threat. Every second she had that gun to your head. They won't be able to talk their way out of this one." The room felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in with decades of noise, shouts, gaslighting, guilt. And now, silence. Not the suffocating kind I'd grown up with, but the kind that comes after something ends. The lead officer turned to Ryan. "We'll need copies of those recordings." "Already done," he said. "Check your email." One of the cops helped me to my feet. "You've got guts," he said. "Most people freeze in situations like this." "I did freeze," I said. "For 30 years. Vanessa was still standing near the table, shaking her head as the officers began to read her rights. She tried to reach for me as they passed, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said simply. "Not anymore." When the last officer led them out, the house was silent except for the rain. My mother sank into a chair, her hands limp in her lap. I didn't know she whispered. I looked at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "Yes, you did," I said. "You just didn't want to." For the first time, I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The flashing lights reflected in puddles on the driveway, red and blue, blending together like the past and present colliding. Behind me, I heard the officer shut the door, sealing in everything I'd finally left behind. The following days passed like I was walking through fog. Reporters camped outside my apartment, the story spreading faster than the rain could wash it away. Local woman survives gunpoint inheritance. Dispute one headline read, "Family betrayal in Vermont estate turns violent another." I couldn't bring myself to read them. I was too tired of being their story. Detective Alvarez from the Burlington Police Department came by every morning for a week. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried both steel and compassion. "We've reviewed the footage," she said during her first visit. "Everything checks out. Your father's facing charges of attempted coercion assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy. Your sister's looking at aiding and abetting plus obstruction." I nodded, clutching a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. "And my mother, she's being treated as a witness for now," Alvarez said carefully. "But the DA won't ignore her silence." "There's a line between fear and compliance, Ms. Morrison." I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. "She crossed it a long time ago." The footage spread online before I could stop it. Someone in the DA's office leaked it a few minutes of chaos, my father shouting Vanessa's trembling hands. The gun, the flash, my calm voice saying, "You should look behind you." It went viral in 2 days. People started calling me the calm one. It was strange being turned into a symbol of strength when in truth I'd been terrified. Ryan tried to shield me from the noise. He was the only one who didn't flinch when I talked about it, the only one who didn't look at me like I was broken. "You did what you had to do," he said one night as we sat on my balcony, the city lights blurring in the drizzle. "Most people would have panicked. You built your own lifeboat." "I didn't want to be brave," I said. "I just wanted to be safe." He looked at me, his expression soft. "Sometimes those are the same thing." When the trial date was announced, the entire town buzzed. Reporters hounded every witness, every relative, every lawyer. The Morrison name, once whispered with respect for our land, was now attached to words like abuse, violence, and greed. I went back to the farmhouse once before the proceedings, escorted by 2 officers. It looked smaller than I remembered. The grass was overgrown. The porch creaked under my weight, and for the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like evidence. Inside, yellow tape stretched across the study where everything had happened. The air still carried the faint scent of smoke and dust. I walked to the corner shelf, tracing the spot where the camera had sat. "You saved me," I whispered to the empty room. Or maybe I was talking to Grandpa. Detective Alvarez appeared in the doorway. "You know, not many people would have had the foresight to set up something like this," she said. "I learned from the best," I replied. "My grandfather used to say, when they hold all the power record everything, they can't rewrite what's on tape." Alvarez smiled faintly. "Smart man." "He was," I said softly. "He believed in fairness. They believed in control. Now the world knows the difference." As I left, I paused by the old family photo on the wall. Dad in his work jacket, Mom in her floral dress, Vanessa and me on either side pretending to smile. It felt like looking at strangers playing a role. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan, DA, confirmed. "Trial starts next month. I'll be there every day." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "So will I." For years, they'd told me to stay silent, to not embarrass the family, to forgive what wasn't forgivable. Now they would have to answer to the same system they'd mocked. Justice wasn't fast, it wasn't easy. But it was coming. And this time I wasn't running from it, I was walking straight toward it. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Rows of spectators filled the benches, their whispers buzzing like static under the fluorescent lights. The case had drawn attention beyond Vermont. Articles in Boston and New York called it the Morrison estate scandal. To everyone else, it was drama. To me, it was the reckoning of 30 years of silence. My father sat at the defense table clean-shaven, wearing a suit that didn't hide the tremor in his hands. Vanessa sat beside him, her hair tied back, face pale but defiant. My mother sat behind them alone, clutching a tissue she never used. When the bailiff called, "All rise," the room went quiet. The prosecutor, Ms. Rhodes, opened with a voice that was both calm and cutting. "This is not a story of greed," she said. "It is a story of control, control enforced by fear, and fear passed down like inheritance." She played the footage. The courtroom dimmed, and on the screen, the past replayed in perfect clarity, my father standing over me, the gun in his hand, Vanessa's voice trembling but cruel, my mother whispering, "Please, Claire." Then the gunfire, the scream, the silence. I watched it with the same steady calm I had that night, but the audience gasped. Some turned away. My father didn't blink. When the video ended, Ms. Rhodes turned to the jury. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a plan. It was coercion at gunpoint, and the victim, Ms. Claire Morrison, survived not by luck but by preparation. She recorded them because she knew no one would believe her otherwise. The defense tried to spin it, of course. It was a family argument, their lawyer insisted. A misunderstanding fueled by alcohol and old wounds. My client never intended to fire that weapon. Ms. Rhodes countered. Intent doesn't erase the gun in her face. Intent doesn't erase the click of the trigger. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom felt smaller. The air thick. I took the stand, hands folded, eyes forward. "He told me I'd regret being born," I said softly. And for most of my life, I believed him. But that night when he pointed the gun at me, I realized something: fear only works if you let it own you. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, but his eyes flickered. Vanessa wouldn't meet my gaze. The cross-examination was cruel, like reliving every childhood bruise. The defense attorney tried to paint me as manipulative, a daughter out for revenge. "You planned the recording, didn't you?" he pressed. "Yes," I said. "So you admit you were trying to entrap your family?" I met his eyes, my voice steady. I wasn't trapping them. I was protecting myself. The prosecutor smiled faintly. "And did you ever raise your voice, Ms. Morrison?" "No," I said. "I didn't need to." The jury deliberated for 3 hours, long enough for the weight of 30 years to feel like a lifetime pressing down. When they returned, the verdict came clear and final: guilty. Harold Morrison, my father, sentenced to 15 years for attempted coercion with a deadly weapon assault and domestic abuse. Vanessa received 7 for aiding and abetting plus obstruction. Mom, in the end, avoided prison, but the judge's words cut sharper than any sentence. Mrs. Morrison's silence is complicity. You chose comfort over conscience. When the gavel struck, I didn't cheer. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there, the sound echoing through me like the closing of a door that had been open too long. Outside, reporters swarmed, flashbulbs popped, microphones crowded my face. "Ms. Morrison, what do you have to say about the verdict?" I paused, looking past them toward the gray sky. "Justice isn't revenge," I said. "It's peace." Then I turned and walked away. That night, the farmhouse was officially transferred to my name. The sheriff handed me the keys. "You can sell it, burn it, or rebuild it," he said. I stood in the rain looking at the porch light flickering weakly. Maybe I'll plant something, I said quietly. He nodded. Seems fitting. As he drove off, I stood there alone, listening to the quiet hum of crickets in the wet grass. The storm had passed. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy, it was clean. Inside the house still held echoes of the past, the scrape of chairs, the echo of arguments, the ghost of a gunshot. But now it also held proof that I had survived it. In the kitchen drawer, I found one of Grandpa's old notebooks. Inside, written in his looping, uneven handwriting, were the words I'd needed all along. They'll try to take what you have because they can't stand what you are. Don't fight for their love, Claire. Fight for your peace. I closed the notebook and whispered I did, Grandpa. I finally did. The rain tapped gently on the window. I stood in that empty house, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like mine. The weeks after the trial moved slowly, like the world itself needed time to adjust to the truth. Reporters stopped calling. The public lost interest. Justice, once headline material, had faded into the background noise of 1,000 other tragedies. But for me, the echoes never really stopped. The courthouse victory didn't erase the scars, it just made them visible. Every morning I woke to sunlight instead of shouting. Still, there were moments when I'd hear phantom footsteps in the hall or smell whiskey and fear in the dark. Trauma doesn't vanish with a verdict, it lingers shapeless but familiar. My mother never reached out after the sentencing. The last image I had of her was in the courtroom gallery crying silently as the judge condemned her husband and daughter. Some said she'd moved to live with her sister in Maine. Others said she refused to leave the farmhouse town as if waiting for someone to forgive her. I didn't. Vanessa tried from prison. Her first letter came 2 months in. The handwriting was tight, desperate. You don't know what it's like to be under his control. I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared too. I thought if I helped him, he'd stop hitting me. I thought I was protecting us both. I read it once, then I folded it neatly and locked it in a drawer. Guilt was her new performance, but I wasn't her audience anymore. Dad, of course, sent nothing. His lawyer tried once to reach out to negotiate some kind of reconciliation before appeal. I told him my only offer was silence. But not everything that followed was pain. There were small, unexpected mercies. Ryan stayed. He didn't ask me to talk, didn't push for closure. He just sat with me on nights when nightmares clawed at my chest, his hand steady on mine. You did the impossible, he'd whisper. You turned fear into evidence. I began to heal the house first, as if by fixing it I could fix myself. The police had released it after the trial, and though I'd thought of selling it, I couldn't. Instead, I stripped it bare, tore out the old wallpaper, burned the dining table where so many arguments had been fought, gutted the study where the gun had been laid down. I replaced the locks, opened the curtains, and painted the walls white. When the neighbors passed by, they'd wave hesitantly, unsure if they should say something. I didn't mind. The quiet was finally mine. It took me nearly a year to decide what to do with the estate. The money, the land, the assets, all of it felt heavy, like wealth soaked in blood. I didn't want it to rot in my name, but I wasn't going to give it away either. Grandpa had trusted me to do something good with it, not something easy. One night, sitting on the porch under a sky that smelled of autumn, I drafted the paperwork, the George Foundation for Survivors of Family Coercion. It would provide legal aid and emergency housing for women and men trapped in domestic manipulation, those who didn't even realize yet that family loyalty wasn't supposed to hurt. Ryan helped me finalize it. You're turning trauma into purpose, he said quietly. I'm turning inheritance into redemption, I corrected. The fund launched 6 months later. Donations poured in after a few local interviews. Survivors wrote letters, women who'd left abusive homes, men who'd fought custody battles, teenagers who'd escaped emotional prisons. They said my story gave them courage. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my voice had been the quietest in the room, and now it was helping others find theirs. Still, there were nights when I'd dream of Vanessa's face the way it looked when the gun went off her scream, sharp with terror, not compassion. I used to wake shaking, unsure if I pitied her or hated her, but over time, that faded too. Some truths cost everything, but silence would have cost more. One evening, a package arrived from the prison. No return address, just my name written carefully in blue ink. Inside was a single photograph, me and Vanessa as children sitting under the apple tree behind the barn, our faces sticky with pie, our arms around each other. On the back, in faint handwriting, were 3 words. "I'm sorry, Claire." I didn't cry. I just placed it beside Grandpa's notebook on the mantel and whispered, "Maybe that's enough." Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's letting go of what still burns and choosing to walk forward through the ashes. 5 years later, the Morrison farm looked nothing like the place where I almost died. The cracked windows were gone, the sagging barn repainted in soft red, and where the study once held gunpowder and guilt, there now stood a small library filled with books about survival, justice, and rebuilding. On the wooden sign outside, carved neatly by hand, were the words, "The George Center," for those finding their voice. It opened every Sunday afternoon, a safe space for survivors to gather. Some came quietly, eyes wary, voices small. Others arrived with determination, ready to tell their stories for the first time. I would sit in the same rocking chair Grandpa used to favor listening, never interrupting, never judging. That was what he had done for me. One woman named Diane once told me, "You don't realize how much power silence gives them until you break it." Her husband had controlled her for 20 years, using money and fear the same way Harold had used his fists and guilt. When she finished speaking, the whole room clapped softly. Not out of pity, out of understanding. Ryan and I ran the foundation together. He'd left his corporate law job to focus on pro bono advocacy for victims of family coercion. He used to joke that I had dragged him into a cause, but I knew he stayed because he believed in it, believed in me. We married quietly in the spring. No press, no spectacle, just a handful of people who knew the meaning of peace. My mother wasn't there. Neither was Vanessa, but when the wind moved through the apple trees that day, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, soft and sure. "You did it, kiddo." After the ceremony, Ryan and I sat under those same trees, the blossoms falling like snow. He looked at me and asked, "Do you ever think about them?" "Every day," I said honestly, "but not the way I used to. The anger's gone. What's left is understanding." "Understanding," he echoed. "They were prisoners of the same fear they built for me," I said. "I just managed to escape first." He squeezed my hand. "And you made a door for others." We laughed quietly, the sound blending with the hum of bees nearby. It struck me how surreal it was to sit in the same field where I once hid from my father's rage, now surrounded by warmth and light. That evening, I walked alone to the far end of the property where we'd placed a small memorial stone for Grandpa George. The inscription read, "He taught her strength and she taught the world." I knelt down, brushing the moss from the letters. "It's strange," I whispered. "You left me everything, but the money wasn't the real inheritance, was it? It was courage." The sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. I could almost imagine him sitting beside me, the faint smell of motor oil and tobacco in the air. When I returned to the farmhouse, a letter waited on the porch. It was from the Vermont Department of Corrections. Vanessa's parole hearing was coming up. She wanted me to speak on her behalf. I sat with it for hours, the weight of it pressing down. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Another part, the one Grandpa had raised, knew that healing wasn't about winning. It was about not letting bitterness rot what you've rebuilt. So I went. Vanessa looked smaller when I saw her again. The sharp edges were gone, her voice quieter, her eyes older. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I know," I replied. She swallowed hard. "I can't ask you to forgive me, but I needed you to know I'm trying to be different." I studied her face for a long moment, searching for the sister I once loved. I found traces faint, but there. "Then keep trying," I said. "That's all the world owes you. That's all I owe you." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry. I'd already shed all my tears for her years ago. When I left the prison, the air felt lighter. Maybe she would change. Maybe she wouldn't, but her choices no longer defined my peace. That night, I stood on the farmhouse porch, watching the lights of the town flicker in the distance. Ryan came up behind me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. For the first time, I think I am. The crickets sang the night breeze warm against my skin. In the quiet, I finally understood something Grandpa had tried to teach me long ago. Justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms. It's what happens when you reclaim your voice, your safety, your worth, and build something beautiful from what tried to destroy you. And that's exactly what I had done. It's been nearly 10 years since that night, and sometimes I still wake up thinking I can hear the storm. But it's not fear that wakes me anymore, it's memory. The kind that no longer hurts, only reminds you how far you've come. The Morrison farm is now more than land or legacy. It's a sanctuary. The George Center has grown into 3 branches across New England, each one named after someone who once thought silence was survival but learned that speaking up is power. The first day a survivor walks through the doors, I see the same look I once had, wary, exhausted, but still carrying a spark that refuses to die. I tell them, you're not broken. You were trained to believe that love hurts. It doesn't. And when they cry, I don't rush to stop them. I just listen, because that's how healing begins, with someone finally listening. Ryan and I have a daughter now, Lily. She's 8, curious, fearless, and has her grandfather's stubborn streak. Sometimes she sits on my lap while I tell her stories, not the painful ones, not yet, but the kind that carry lessons hidden between the lines. Your great-grandpa George built this land with his hands, I tell her. He taught me that courage isn't loud, it's steady. She nods, not fully understanding, but one day she will. Every year on the anniversary of the trial, I visit Grandpa's stone at the far edge of the property. I bring a single wildflower, the kind he used to pluck from the fields, and place it beside the engraving. Then I whisper, "It's still working, Grandpa." The truth you planted, it's still growing. Sometimes reporters reach out wanting to make another documentary or article about the gun, the will, the viral recording. I say no. The story isn't about the gun anymore. It's about what came after the rebuilding, the quiet victories, the moments of peace that no one writes headlines about. I've learned that justice doesn't erase pain, it just gives it shape. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about making sure it doesn't own you anymore. There are days when I still feel the phantom weight of the past pressing against my ribs, but then I look at Lily chasing butterflies across the field, and I realize the past no longer dictates the ending. Vanessa was released on parole last spring. She sent one final letter, not asking for forgiveness, not even expecting a response. Just a single page that said, "I hope you're happy. I hope you found what we never could." I didn't reply, but I did smile, because in her own way she was right. I had found it peace, not revenge. The farmhouse porch still creaks underfoot. The apple trees still bloom in May. Life goes on softer and stronger. When visitors come for workshops or therapy sessions, I sometimes walk them to the same room where my father once held a gun to my head. It's now filled with sunlight and shelves of books. The bullet hole in the wall remains framed under glass. I kept it there deliberately. Some call it morbid. I call it proof. Proof that pain can be transformed, not erased. Proof that survival can become purpose. At the end of every session, when people ask me how I managed to stay calm that night, how I found the strength not to break, I tell them the truth. Strength isn't what you have when everything's fine. It's what you become when everything's taken. And then I remind them of the moment that changed everything. The smile, the red light, the truth caught forever on camera. That night wasn't about fear, I say. It was about freedom. I smiled because for the first time, the truth wasn't theirs to control anymore. When the sun sets over the fields, turning the sky gold, I sometimes sit with Ryan on the porch swing. Lily plays nearby, her laughter echoing through the open air. Ryan will glance at me and say, "You know you could have left all this behind. Sold it, started somewhere new." I shake my head. No, this is where the story turned. It's where it should end. He smiles, pulling me close. Then let's make sure it never begins again for anyone else. And that's what we do, every day, every story, every survivor who finds their way here. Because the real inheritance wasn't land or money, it was resilience. It was the courage to turn a weapon into a lesson, a scar into a map, and a name once whispered in fear into one spoken with pride. And sometimes when the wind sweeps across the fields and the red light on the porch camera flickers softly in the dark, I think of the girl I once was, the one sitting at that table, the gun against her head, and I whisper to her through time, "You made it." Justice wasn't the end, it was the beginning.